for John Humphrys as you've never heard him before. Humphrys in Search of God.
Radio 4 interviewers don't have to observe many rules, but we are required to be impartial, not to express our own convictions. Well, I'm breaking that rule for these interviews with leaders from the Christian, Jewish and Islamic faiths. Indeed, that's the point of them. I personally am involved. I'm inviting them, one at a time, to convert me, to persuade me, if you like, that God does in fact exist. I believe that once, but for nearly 50 years I've been a journalist, and I've seen perhaps too much suffering, too many children dying, too much wanton savagery to continue to believe it. A God of mercy, any God, seems out of the question. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, is my first interviewee. If anyone should be able to convince me, surely it is he. First, though, I want to know if he believes there is a God or knows there is a God.
I don't know that there is God or a God in the simple sense that I can tick that off as an item I'm familiar with. Believing is a matter of being committed to the reality of God. The knowledge that comes, that grows, if you like, through a relationship. I believe, I commit myself, I accept what God gives me, I try to accept what God gives me. Grow in that relationship, and you grow in a kind of certainty or anchorage in the belief. Knowledge, well, yes, of a certain kind, yes. But not acquaintance with a particular fact or a particular state of affairs. It's the knowledge that comes from relation and takes time.
But what do you say then to somebody like me, because I've given it time, if choice is not a matter of giving, is it? It happens. I'm 63. I believed. I had an unquestioning belief as a child, as children tend to do. I was brought up to believe, and I was christened, I was confirmed. I remember as one of the things one had to do, writing my own prayer book out. I prayed, and I had an unquestioning belief, and over the years it was chipped away, and now there's a gap where it previously existed. So I've given it time, and I think about it a great deal, and have continued to think about it. Why has it not happened to me?
Well, I'm not going to offer you a definitive answer to that, but perhaps I could ask
you
what...
would.
No, but I could. But I would like to ask what it was that chipped away, and what it was that was chipped away at. What did you think God was?
Well, I suppose originally I thought it was the old man with the beard.
Yeah.
Of course, we all do. And eventually, I suppose I thought God was a supreme being, the creator, supreme moral conscience. I toyed with conscience for a great deal of time, and all the rest of it. And I suppose in the end what chipped away at it for me, what finally destroyed it for me indeed, was the presence of so much suffering. It's the classic thing. This is hardly original. I'm very conscious of that. It's very cliched, but nonetheless very real. And I could not any longer accept, and we had a conversation about it, you and I, on the Today programme, Beslan. When Beslan happened, although I'd seen lots of other things as bad as, how do you make comparisons between these awful things? But nonetheless, that was, I suppose, if there were a final straw, that was probably it.
And you're obviously not very impressed by the free will defence here.
I don't understand the free will defence. Heavens, you're interviewing me now. What a nice change. There's a conversion.
There's a conversion.
I'm not impressed by the free will position. No, free will is fine for mature, reasonably intelligent, or at least conscious adults, mature adults. Children have no free will. The murderer has the will. The victim doesn't.
But isn't that the nature of the case? The free will of one person, of you or of me, affects others, whatever we do. And I can't quite see how a universe could be constructed in which some people's free will was, if you like, guaranteed to be aborted at certain points so that it wouldn't damage others. When people talk about free will in relation to moral evil, I think what they're saying is something like this. God has made a universe in which conscious people emerge, people with decisions to make, with thoughts that can form their decisions. And because we don't live as isolated units in little bubbles around the place, my thought, my action impinges on yours. We're interconnected. Our freedom affects others. Yep. Now, what would it be like if we said, okay, God makes that sort of world, but there is some sort of cut-off point where the effect that my freedom has on other people is guaranteed not to make their life too difficult. What's the cut-off point? Now, that's where I think there's a rather stark choice. I think either you say, that's the kind of world it is, and go on reflecting in the light of God about it and try to make sense of it.
Which is what you do.
Which is what I do. Or, what you say, well, the whole notion of a God making a world with freedom in it just doesn't wash.
Except that that's not quite what I'm saying. You've used the word love. God is a God of love.
Right.
And a merciful God. How do you reconcile a God of love and a God of mercy with what we see happening? How do you say to the mother whose child is dying of cancer that God is a God of love? Where is the love of God here?
In a way, it's the same kind of question that arises. Is there a point at which God has to intervene to clear his character? And how bad does it have to be? A child with cancer, an innocent in those circumstances, suffers and suffers appallingly because certain causes, certain processes have kicked in. We don't quite know why.
But God created them.
God created the system in which they occur,
Indeed.
just as God creates a system in which human freedom occurs.
Indeed. But he created everything according to your basis.
That's right. That's right. Which doesn't mean that every single thing that happens, God says, oh, well, I'll make life difficult for them. I'll step in there. But that's the system within which these things arise.
Why? What was God getting at when he created this world in the certain knowledge, because God knows everything, in the certain knowledge that there would be enormous, intolerable, literally intolerable, because many people go mad or kill themselves as a result of these awful things. I know of a family whose child has just died. They are now, their lives have been destroyed. They will never recover their life, ever, ever. Why did God create that world?
My faith tells me, and it's very hard to believe in these circumstances, but it tells me, and I trust this, that the world, yes, is such that suffering arises in these unspeakable ways. It also tells me that what God can do with those circumstances and those persons is not exhausted by the world. There's more.
Sorry, more what?
God has more to give. God has more to do with the mother, the child, whatever the circumstances are. God has an eternity in which to heal or to lead forward the people involved in those circumstances. I don't mean make it up to them, but I mean that there's a future.
But the child is dead. The parents' lives have been destroyed.
Humanly speaking,
yes.
That's the end of the story.
Right.
And that's the nightmare. Faith says that's not the end of the story.
So we'll go to heaven.
God has eternity in which to go on working with those persons.
So the best you can offer to the person whose child has died from cancer, the best you can offer those parents is bear up. There's a reason, as it were, and forgive me for the cliched language, but your reward will be in heaven.
No.
Is that it?
No, that's not what I want to offer at all, because the conversation I'd have in those circumstances isn't the kind of conversation I'd have here. For one thing, I think I need to say, if someone says, where's God in that situation, it would have to be answered partly in terms of where are the people who are, as a matter of fact, alongside those who are suffering, offering what love and healing they can, whether in the name of God or not. The act of God is there as well. I'm not saying there's a purpose in the sense that God has said, oh yes, for that goal, for that end, I will devise this disaster. Or even that there's a reward in heaven. I'd say there's hope.
Hope of what?
Hope of healing.
When?
In God's perspective, in God's time. Maybe within this world and maybe not. And part of the difficulty of living with faith is the knowledge, which you've underlined so powerfully, that for some people, in our time frame in this world, there is not that kind of healing. It's not there. And that's not easy to face or to live with.
But you can live with it.
Just.
Let me be clear then. Is God, or is he not, an interventionist? Does he look at things that are happening and say, enough already? Or does he not? Because in the Bible, that is what he did. If we are to believe our Old and New Testaments, God intervened, regular as clockwork.
The model that presupposes is God is in one bit of the room and there's, if you like, chaos in the other end of the room. God looks at his watch and decides at what point he's got to step in to sort it out. At the same time, I think, although the Bible uses such language, talks about miracle, there's already in the Bible, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, a level of puzzlement about that. People are already asking, well, if he does it there, why doesn't he do it there? And Jesus goes to his hometown and he doesn't heal anybody. Why not?
Picks the odd person here and there.
Picks the odd person here and there. And I think the only way of making full sense of this is to say, once again, going back to the basic questions, God isn't a person alongside other persons, a reality alongside other realities, someone on the other side of the room watching. God is the agency that's at work in everything and has set up the world in such a way that not only is evil possible, but moments are also possible where something breaks through of healing, of miracle, of newness. Why it breaks through here rather than there, we don't know the causes that make that possible.
Something else we have to take on trust, on faith.
On faith. What I'm trying to outline, and I know it's not a simple thought, is that God set up the universe in such a way that when certain causes come together, certain circumstances come together, more is possible than those immediately involved might imagine. As I say, something breaks through. Not because God decides that there and not there it'll happen, but because God has set up the conditions in which, in this situation rather than that, as I've sometimes put it, the membrane is thinner. His action is nearer the surface. And that may be because of human prayer, because of human holiness. Something more comes through than you might otherwise expect.
Let me put to you what John Fowles wrote. You'll be familiar with the quote, I'm sure. Freedom of will is the highest human good, and it is impossible to have both that freedom and an intervening deity. Mm-hmm. Isn't that the reality? It is either or.
No, it's not, because if our freedom is the highest good, and if that freedom is, as the Bible says, the image of God in us, then the full exercise of our freedom in, let's say, in holiness, in prayer, can allow something of God's action to come in with ours. Not overriding our freedom, but, if you like, working through it.
But if we accept freedom of will, why do we pray? Why do you pray if you know that in the end God is not going to intervene, unless through a happy combination of circumstances, and that very rarely indeed? Because they prayed in Auschwitz.
They prayed in Auschwitz. And they prayed, I imagine, for two reasons. One is, God is always to be praised. And the extraordinary thing is that they prayed in Auschwitz, that people felt that God's name was to be honoured even there.
Or they were in total despair and they had nowhere else to go, and that's the other explanation.
And I think there's something in both of them. But I don't think it's just about total despair and having nowhere else to go. They knew they were doomed, I think, people who prayed in Auschwitz. I read about those, especially the Hasidic Orthodox Jews, going into the chambers, praising God. Now, whatever that's about, it's not easy solutions, it's not rewards and success, but they prayed because they had to do it. God's name had to be honoured. Now, that's one reason. The other reason, I think, is that I pray so that in my own focus, attempting to be a loving focus on this person, this problem, I may somehow make a channel for God's action to come through into the situation, To what degree and with what effect, I won't know. But I've got to do it, because I believe that's one of the factors that might make a difference.
Let's get back to my search, which is what the programme's supposed to be about, I suppose. I can say to you, will say to you, I want to believe. I have opened my heart, if you like. I've gone down on my knees night after night, and I have tried talking to God, and I have failed. Why can't I say, but hang on a minute, you have faith, lucky chap, I want it. And I want it, perhaps, just as sincerely as you do. But I am denied it.
What do you want to believe?
I want to believe... I want to believe in the sort of vague God, if you'll forgive me, that you appear to believe in.
Why?
Because you clearly get great satisfaction from it, and because I want to make sense of the world, because I cannot understand why we're doing what we're doing to each other, and because there seem to be many answers out there. Now, bizarrely, those people who profess faith don't seem to worry about being able to find the answers. You see, the number of times you've said to me, actually, I don't know, but that's what I believe. I'd like to be able to do that. That sounds more cynical than it's meant to be.
No, I hear you. I could say the basic question, the challenge, if you like, to you is, can you believe that you, John Humphrys, are the object of an unconditional, eternal love which values you in such a way that your contribution as you to the world is uniquely precious to the one who made it?
No, I can't, because I don't believe that there is one who made it.
Right.
So I'm stuck.
Does it help at all to give the time not just to talking to God, but to the silent waiting on the truth, which for some people is the beginning of this? I mean, pure sort of sitting and breathing in the presence of question mark. Because
Presence of what? You've got to remove the question mark.
Well, I can remove it for you, theoretically. I can't remove it from you personally. For me, the presence of an eternal personal love. But thinking of people I've known who've found their way to faith, sometimes it's been in the context of that silence in the presence of, and the question mark very, very gradually eroding as something of love comes through.
I have a 6-year-old child. He asked me the other day whether Africa was bigger than England, and we had a little conversation about that, and I tried to explain the difference between continents and gave up at that. But it was 3 o'clock in the morning, so it wasn't an easy conversation. And
I know these conversations.
and then I said, but yes, Africa is indeed bigger than England. And his next question was, why did God allow that to happen? What do you say to a child who if you yourself do not believe, apart from the blindingly obvious, some people believe in God, some people don't believe in God, you will decide for yourself. You can't quite do that to a